Welcome to my review of Kaze and the Wild Masks for Switch. I believe this is on a few different platforms. And this was quite a good game in the style of Donkey Kong Country. So if you're familiar with those games, then you'll probably like this game. Similar to the DKC games, you have different animal forms that you can take, which changes the way that the stages play. So it gives it some nice variety. You can also collect letters and shit like that in the stages if you're into that. But I just went straight through to beat the game. And for me, I believe it took me maybe a little bit over 5.5 hours to beat the game. You know, going purely just for the completion of the game, not trying to collect everything. So if you want, you can just play through and beat the stages, you know, as you would play like a game normally, like Super Mario Brothers or something like that, just going straight through. And you know, most of the stages will have some kind of animal transformation within the stage, which also acts as a checkpoint if you die. You don't have a live system or anything like that. The way it works is you have checkpoints in the stages, so as long as you keep retrying, you can retry as many times as you like. Now, I'm not sure about how the game saves as far as the save system, because I usually left it in suspend mode and went back to it. But as long as you leave it on, I can confirm that you will at least be able to keep replaying from any stage checkpoints you get to. Each stage usually has several checkpoints in it, even though the stages are fairly long. They usually have multiple checkpoints. See, this is a checkpoint statue. When you get to this statue, you can start back there when you die. And you can usually take a few hits, I believe. I think you have to get this extra little heart thing to be able to take an extra hit, if I remember right. I'm not sure if the game is normally one-hit deaths, but most of the time I believe I had, an extra hit that I could take. So you can, usually take at least one hit. But the game is pretty challenging. It's definitely pretty challenging. It's not as hard as Donkey Kong Country 2 for the Super Nintendo, which is a much, much harder game than this. So if you have beaten some of those older Donkey Kong Country games, this will be pretty moderate for you. Because all three of those games are quite a bit harder than this game. Even the first game, which was maybe the easiest of the three. And the second one being the hardest. Probably the hardest in the series. But, this would be probably even a little easier than the newer Donkey Kong Country for the Wii and Wii U. I think from what I remember, because I have played through all those games, I think this was even a little bit easier than those. And those games are not as hard as the OG fucking games from the Super Nintendo era, which had a nice little difficulty increase over the newer entries. But this game, as a platformer, it's kind of like in the moderate to upper moderate. There are parts that are kind of hard and challenging, for sure. Even for me, which I'm pretty experienced with these games, but there were some parts that gave me some trouble, and I had to repeat quite a few times. Thus why it took me over 5 hours to beat. So you do have your hovering that you can do when you're just a base character. You can kind of hover like Diddy does in DKC. You can do a little air hover by holding the button down, and you can bounce off enemies. And this game is almost like a carbon copy of the DKC games. When I say that, I mean down to the animal transformations and down to the way you attack. If you want to attack enemies without jumping on them, you can do a cartwheel and kind of roll into them, just like you would in DKC. What is cool about the animal transformation, just like the original, the DKC games, is that you have things like a shark would allow you to traverse water really well. Now here you're going to see I'm not holding down the run button, basically. So I'm swimming really slow, and I'm using the drill attack to move faster. That was a mistake I made. Later on I figured out that you can hold down one of the buttons, and you can increase your base speed, kind of like running but underwater. And you can increase your regular speed by quite a bit by holding it down. At this point, I was just spamming the drill button, which is really meant to be an attack, not so much a way to move faster. But either way, each one of the animal forms will allow you to traverse, the levels in a different way. So the shark is really good for water, obviously. But you have a bird, which lets you fly, and you have flying sections you have to deal with as the bird, and you've just got there's probably about 4 different forms that really change the game. And the final boss, I'm going to show that in its entirety. The final boss is cool because it makes use of all the different forms. You know, you have to complete sections with all the different forms, and there's no checkpoints in the final boss fight. So you have to beat it. It's a several minute long fight with multiple forms that you have to beat, on one life. Maybe you can take a single hit. You may get some health, but I think if you get hit twice, you die. So you have to really learn it. So now let's see some of the boss fights. Here's one of the boss fights. And this one was cool because you had to fight the boss in animal form. So here you're in the bird form. And I believe this was one of the easier ones that I may have beaten on the first try. But it's pretty cool. You have to, just dodge a bunch of shit, and then there's going to be an opening where you can attack. But all the boss fights are pretty well done. The game, the overall pacing of the game is not, as exciting to me or challenging as like the older DKC games, which, for me those games are all like an 8 or above. So this one is not quite on that level for me, but it's a very good imitation of those games. It definitely does a good job at trying to replicate that type of gameplay. It's probably the only like indie game that I've played that really tries to be like a clone of those old games. It's really, really copying the shit out of those old games. So, I mean, it is cool to see because it's well executed. And those are some of the best platformers, I think. So, imitating them is not really a bad thing. Because you don't see too many games that play like the DKC games aside from those games. So, the game is definitely interesting in that regard. But yeah, you can see that it's basically just, dodging for a while, and then you get certain chances to hit the boss. Maybe 3 different opportunities to hit the boss, and then I think maybe on the third time you attack it will kill it. Which is kind of a typical thing in a lot of these games, hit the boss 3 times to kill it. I don't remember this boss fight well enough to know if that's what it did, but it does follow a lot of standard, boss kind of, things that have been done. So I wouldn't be surprised. But some of the boss fights can be pretty challenging, especially the final boss. That took me a little while to learn. Because you really can't get hit too much at all in this game, so it keeps it challenging. I think the hit point system is very similar to DKC as well, now that I think about it, because the extra heart you have is kind of like in DKC where you would have, an extra character with you, and if you got hit once, that character would die, and then you'd be stuck with the other character. So essentially you had 2 hit points before you died. This is kind of like that most of the time, so I guess it's copying that. It's very, very similar to those games. I don't think I showed too many of the boss fights, but I wanted to show some of them just to give an idea. There are little cutscenes in between the stages. Very basic cutscenes. I usually skip them. But I show a little bit of that here. I'll definitely show some of the later, stages and show some of the challenges that you can expect. Because I think it's kind of important to show that in the review just because players of different skill levels, if something looks like it may be too difficult, might be a reason to avoid it if you're not looking for that type of challenge. Though, a lot of times it can make you a better player. So, back in the fucking olden days, like NES games were hard as fuck, and, being a kid that grew up with those, you would either learn how to play those games or, you wouldn't get far in them at all. You might not even get past the first stage. So, I think it made me a better player, but not so much in the NES era. I didn't start really beating games until, like, the 16-bit era quite a bit later. So, it's maybe not the best way to get into games, but I enjoyed it because it made games a lot more mysterious, and the challenge and everything was kind of part of the mystique of the game. There was no internet or anything back then. So yeah, this stage is one of the early ones that gets, fairly challenging. It's not an easy stage. Definitely harder than some of the other stages up to this point. So you can see this is the kind of platforming and stuff that you'll do, but it will escalate as you get farther in. It does get a decent amount harder than this, and I will show, some of the standout moments, some of the more challenging moments. I like to show that in my reviews. And of course, I'll show the full final boss, which will, that's the hardest part of the game, so that'll give you an idea of what will be required to beat the game. Now, I know some players would consider that like a spoiler, but, for these type of games, I never personally gave a shit about what the final boss was or anything like that, even though I just really enjoy the gameplay, but it's not like it's spoiling anything for me personally. But for players who do feel that way, you may want to fast forward to the end of the review, obviously, if you just want my score. But here's another flying sequence. And it's kind of just navigating, dodging shit. You can go in here and get some health. So there's a little bit of exploration, almost none, but there is a little bit. If you want to do the bonus stages and shit like that, you could go off to the side a little bit, and you could look for hidden areas that you can kind of bust through. Like, I think there's some invisible walls and things if you're into trying to find all that shit. The game does have that, so maybe that gives some replayability to players that like that. I've never been into collecting. It's always been something I really didn't like when collecting was forced in a game. So I really enjoyed the game just as playing it straight through as a game to beat. And this stage really wasn't one of the harder ones. The flying sequences I found not to be too bad. So actually, yeah, I guess I didn't show some of the harder later stages. There are definitely some harder later stages, though, where you'll have to do some harder platforming. But I guess you'll see that when you play the game. I edited this a few days ago, so I wasn't sure exactly what I showed. But this is the final boss. And this definitely takes some practice. This is the hardest part of the game. So, obviously if you can't complete this, then you won't be able to get through the game. But it's just learning your positioning and patterns. It'll just take some practice. You do get to start on the final boss, but you'll have to start on the first form of the final boss that you saw here in the beginning. So this goes through all the different animal forms after a phase. You'll have to go through all the forms, the bird, all the various forms, which I didn't even show all of them in the review. But you will see them now in this fight. I believe it goes through all of them. If not, it's most of them, but it's quite a long fight. But it's just a matter of, this is like an old arcade game where you can memorize your movement and positionings, and you can just play the same way each time and kind of carve out your own path. You just have to find what that path is, just like a lot of old games. And this game is consistent. If you play the same each time, you'll get consistent results. That's why this will definitely be a good game for speedrunning because, it behaves the same way as far as I can tell. So now we've gone through the shark phase. And then, of course, you do another phase where you're trying to avoid it for a while. And you have to collect these little pink gems. And when you collect a certain amount, you will kind of paralyze the boss and bring it to the next form. So that's what I'm doing here. But this is collecting done in a good way, not just for the sake of collecting a bunch of random shit. I mean, it works well within the context of the fight. If you miss the gems, I'm guessing that it'll probably keep looping for a while, but I usually was able to get them by this point. I knew where they were, so I didn't really miss them. So now we are in this little iguana form, which basically has double jumps and a dive. It can be a little tricky, obviously. You do have to have it down. Now, I think this is the final form, and the final form starts you off as one of the other animals right from the start, so you don't have to go through another phase or anything. This one can clamber up walls and shit like that, and it has a dash, a mid-air dash. So they all behave a little bit differently. And the game utilizes that in the stages, even though I didn't show all the different types of stages and stuff. I wanted to make the review somewhat quick, thus the term quick review. But this should give you a good idea of what you can expect. But yeah, for me, this game is a 7.5 out of 10. I think it's a pretty good DKC clone type of game. It's not on the level of greatness as those games for me, but it's a good copy, and I'd give it a 7.5 out of 10. If you have any questions, let me know. Thanks for watching.